You don't belong here. This is a memorial, not a place to wander in looking for a free seat. That's what the young soldier said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. The old man said nothing. No anger, no fear, no protest. He simply reached into his coat pocket and slowly pulled out a small, time-worn piece of silver metal, scratched by years but still clear enough to read, "Call sign Raven Zero." A young soldier glanced at it and radioed in. And then, the general on the stage suddenly froze. He stood at attention, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "Raven Zero, is that really you?" And then, the entire plaza fell silent. Back then, in the early 1990s, the Middle East was a chessboard of shadows. The air was heavy with the scent of oil fires and betrayal. Maps were redrawn in secret, and the names of places were whispered more than spoken. And among all that was a man without a uniform. No rank, no badge, no records. They called him only one thing: Raven Zero. He didn't belong to any official unit. He had no assigned barracks, no pay grade. He was a whisper passed between generals in back rooms, a name scribbled in pencil and quickly erased. A special volunteer, the kind you send when you need something done and don't want to explain how. In 1991, a SEAL recon team was deployed outside the city of Al-Qud. Their objective: intercept intel on an illegal arms transfer rumored to involve chemical warheads. The plan was simple until it wasn't. They were dropped in under cover of night, but within 20 minutes they were pinned down. The desert betrayed them. Every exit route was compromised. Radio signals jammed, and mortars began raining in from 3 directions. It was a death trap, and everyone at headquarters knew it. But instead of calling in airstrikes or risking another team, someone made a different call. Send in Raven Zero. He came alone. No convoy, no backup. No convoy, no. Just an unmarked Jeep, dust-caked goggles, and a rifle older than most of the brass calling the shots. He wasn't a soldier. He was something else. A relic from missions that never happened, who walked through danger like he was made of shadow. Raven didn't rush in with firepower. He used deception. First, he set up a false command post 2 clicks west of the SEAL's position, broadcasting misleading chatter to enemy scouts. Then he planted heat decoys and marked false extraction paths to draw snipers away. In under an hour, the enemy believed a battalion-sized force was inbound, and in the chaos, the SEAL team moved. Raven Zero never joined the team. He never made contact. He watched from the ridge with a pair of battered binoculars and timed the mortar strikes down to the second. He fired only once, a single shot that disabled a vehicle preparing to cut off the SEAL's escape. Then he vanished. When the SEALs returned to base, they asked, "Who was that man up on the hill?" The commanding officer stared back in silence. Then came the line they would hear again and again. "There was no one up there. You got out on your own." Reports were scrubbed. No name mentioned. No after-action medals. No commendations. Raven Zero wasn't just unacknowledged. He was unwritten, and he preferred it that way. No one knows exactly how many missions Raven completed. Some say he worked in the jungles before the Gulf. Others claim he operated in the Balkans, even Central America. But one thing is agreed upon. After Operation Nightbird, he disappeared. Not retired, not reassigned, just gone. One SEAL years later said, "He was the kind of man who didn't belong in a parade. He belonged to the silence between battles, to the seconds that decide whether 6 men go home or never come back." Raven left no address, no forwarding contact, only a weathered metal tag left in a mess hall supply crate. "Mission complete. Keep your men sharp. Don't look for me." Signed, RZ. And so he faded, not into memory, but into myth, until decades later. A man with that same metal tag in a worn brown coat walked silently into a memorial ceremony and shook an entire military installation to stillness. Because sometimes, the heroes we owe the most to are the ones we're never allowed to thank. Back in the present, far from the heat of battle and the adrenaline of midnight extractions, Raven Zero was no longer a name anyone whispered. Here, in a rust-covered shipyard on the outskirts of town, he was just another old man, with tired eyes and calloused hands. No uniform, no salute, no file number, no rank. They called him Old Ray. He swept the loading docks before sunrise, ran maintenance on break room heaters in the winter, replaced light bulbs, tightened valves, made the place work quietly, like he once did for an entire war zone. He never told stories, never wore medals, and no one thought to ask. To the younger crew, he was just that strange man with perfect posture, a quiet stare, and a mop always in hand. But if you watch closely, you'd notice things. He always walked the perimeter once before starting work, like clockwork. His boots were polished, even if the rest of him wasn't. And every Friday at 17 he paused for exactly 60 seconds by the flagpole out back, like marking some silent ritual. He had a room, not a home. Ray lived in a small room above the boiler building, just enough space for a cot, a kettle, and a stack of old notebooks filled with sketched maps and scribbled coordinates. No photos, no decorations, just one folded flag in a shadow box. No inscription. He received no visitors, made no calls. He had no family that anyone knew of. But every year when the day came, the day of the Veterans Memorial Ceremony at the base, he disappeared. He never missed that day. It didn't matter if it was raining, or if his knees were aching, or if the shipyard doubled his shift. Every year, Ray would put on the same faded brown coat, lace up the boots that never quite lost their military crease, and walk the 3.5 miles from the docks to the main gate of the naval base. He never asked to go inside, never argued. He just stood behind the outer fence, watching, like a sentry, like a shadow guarding what once was. A few of the older guards came to recognize him. They'd offer coffee, nod politely, but he'd never say more than a few words. He didn't seem sad, just present. But this year was different. This year, the sun broke through earlier than usual. This year, Ray stood at the gate, staring not at the ceremony itself, but at the marble wall behind the podium. He held something in his hand, a thin metal case, worn at the corners. The guard on duty was new, young, sharp-cut uniform, buzzed hair, the kind of posture that says, "I follow the book." "Sir," he said firmly, "the public area is that way. This section's for family and approved guests only." Ray didn't answer. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out the object, and showed it. The young guard squinted at it. A strange expression crossed his face, confusion mixed with uncertainty. It wasn't a standard ID. It was something else. A name engraved, a designation, 2 words, Raven 0. He didn't wait for permission. Ray gave the boy a quiet nod and walked past. Not fast, not proud, just steady, like it was time. He passed rows of chairs filled with families in suits and uniforms, children with folded flags in their arms, brass playing soft in the background. But not a single eye turned to him. He wasn't supposed to be seen. That had always been the rule. But this time, something pulled him forward. He stepped beyond the ropes. To the left, near the wreaths. To the right, the podium. In front of him, the crowd. And at the center, a general about to speak. Ray didn't speak, didn't raise a hand. He simply stopped at the edge of the stage, turned toward the marble wall, and stood at attention, his eyes focused, his breath calm. He was no longer old Ray the janitor. In that moment, he was back in the dirt, back in the shadows, back in a war no one remembered, except the men who made it home because he never expected to. For 30 years, he stood outside the fence. This time, he stepped in, and history followed. For most in attendance, the ceremony was just beginning. Children fidgeted in folding chairs. Brass instruments gleamed in the morning sun. Camera crews adjusted tripods, and families whispered names of loved ones engraved in marble behind the stage. Then the radio crackled. A junior officer leaned in and whispered something to the general. Just one line. The general's expression changed. It was subtle at first. His shoulders stiffened, his brow furrowed, his breath caught, and then his lips moved. Raven 0. The words barely left his throat, but for those who knew, those who still remembered, The name cut sharper than any trumpet blast. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd, and there he was, standing still, arms folded behind his back, at the far left of the seating area. No lanyard, no badge, no ribbon, just a plain brown coat and boots polished beyond reason. The general stepped down from the stage. The color guard shifted. Photographers lowered their cameras. Each step he took echoed louder than the applause minutes before. He stopped a few feet from the man. They locked eyes, decades between them, one in full regalia, the other a shadow of a name that officially never existed. Then without a word, the general stood straight, heels together, hand to brow. He saluted, not a casual nod, not a symbolic gesture for the cameras. It was crisp, military, full. Gasps rippled through the rows. A few murmurs followed. "Who is that? Did he just say Raven Zero? No way, Oz, that's a myth." But then from the third row back, an older man in a Marine Corps cap stood slowly, his hand trembling. He stared at the old man for a long moment, then saluted too. "I'd be dead without him," he said aloud. "Al-Qut, 93. Another stood behind him. Army dress blues, medals clinking, eyes welling. "He carried my entire squad out after the Black Hawk went down. No backup. Just him." Then another, and another. One by one, the old soldiers rose from their seats. SEALs, Rangers, Airborne, men who hadn't stood for anything in years, stood for him. The crowd fell silent. Civilians, who moments ago were checking their phones, now held them at their sides. Children stopped whispering. Even the wind seemed to hush. What began as a reprimand for an uninvited guest had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't celebration. It was reverence. Pure, wordless, shared reverence. You could see it in the faces of the younger officers, confusion giving way to respect. Some began searching through their internal rosters. Some whispered into radios, asking intelligence units if the name was in any archives. None found it, because Raven Zero was never supposed to exist, and yet, here he was, flesh and blood, with the weight of forgotten sacrifice carved into every line on his face. The general lowered his salute and spoke, barely above a whisper, but the entire plaza heard it. "Sir, if I'd known you were here, I'd have given you the podium." Ray shook his head gently. "No podium," he said. "No speeches. I just came to remember." That was it. No demand for recognition, no medals requested, no drama, just a man who'd done the unthinkable, then quietly disappeared so the others could live. A woman in the crowd, daughter of a former Navy chief, broke down in quiet sobs. She had heard her father mention a ghost in the desert, a man who wasn't real but had saved real men. She thought it was myth. Now she knew. The cameramen, once looking for dramatic crowd shots, now zoomed in quietly on the rows of aging veterans rising to their feet, one by one, hands raised to their brows. A field of salutes, some clean and sharp, others shaking and slow, joints stiff with age and memory, but all sincere. The system had no protocol for this. There was no line in the program, no paragraph in the script, no contingency in the event manual for what to do when a call sign erased from records walks through the gate and causes an entire generation of soldiers to rise. So they did what they could. They let the silence speak. And for nearly a minute, no one said a word, no bugles, no announcements, no orders, just the sound of the flag overhead fluttering once, twice, then still. Sometimes the most powerful sound in a ceremony is silence, and sometimes the loudest honor is a name once forbidden, spoken freely again. The program had no line item for this, no planned speaker slot, no prepared bio, no title. But when the MC saw the general still standing, head slightly bowed, and the entire plaza locked in a silence too heavy to break, he did something off script. He stepped away from the podium, unplugged his earpiece, and turned to the man in the brown coat. "Sir," he said gently, offering the microphone, "I believe this is your moment." The old man didn't reach for it right away. He looked out at the crowd, not seeking recognition, just checking the room like he always had, like a soldier scanning for blind spots. Then slowly, he stepped forward. He gripped the podium with both hands, not for balance, but for memory. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that carried, not by volume, but by weight. My name isn't important. You've already said it. I was never meant to be remembered. But there's a story that belongs here. Not for me, but for the men who never got to speak. The plaza remained silent. They called it Operation Nightbird. Only 6 people knew the full scope. 5 of them are dead. The 6th is talking to you now. He paused. In January of 1993, a SEAL recon unit was deployed to intercept chemical ordnance intel outside Al-Qut. What they weren't told was that location was compromised from the start. The enemy was waiting. They were surrounded within 18 minutes. He looked up, scanning the veterans seated before him. Some nodded slowly, memories surfacing like smoke in a still room. No backup could reach them. No air support cleared. So they sent me. Not because I was the best, but because I was expendable. His words weren't bitter, just factual. I didn't go in to be a hero. I went in to buy time, to give those 6 men a window, just 5 minutes to move. He paused again, letting that sink in. I carried a decoy comms pack, blasted fake chatter about inbound fire teams, then used a cliffside reflector I built from broken signal mirrors to scatter enemy coordinates. It worked. The SEALs broke out. 4 were wounded, but they made it. None of them knew I was watching from above. He glanced briefly at the general. You were one of them. You didn't see me, but I saw you. The general nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. When it was done, I walked out the same way I came in, alone. The report, never filed. The gear, scrapped. My name, redacted before it was even printed. Ray's voice wavered for the first time, not from sadness, but because memory has its own kind of gravity. I wasn't allowed to exist on paper. That was the deal. No medal, no burial flag, not even a name on the wall if I died. But I said yes anyway, because some things matter more than credit. At that, something shifted in the crowd. The civilians began to understand. This wasn't just a war story. It was a testimony, a reminder that loyalty isn't always loud, that duty doesn't always demand spotlight, that some oaths are sworn in silence and kept forever. Ray looked down at his hand, opened it. There in his palm was the call sign tag, scratched, dulled by time, but still legible. This little piece of metal isn't an award. It's a reminder of what we owe each other when no one's watching. Then he looked out again, not at the soldiers this time, but at the younger generation watching from the sidelines. To those of you wearing the uniform now, don't chase medals. Don't wait for recognition. Just do the job, and do it well. Because even if they erase your name, someone out there will remember why it mattered. He didn't speak long. He didn't need to. But when he stepped back, the silence he left behind was sacred. The general walked forward once more. This time he didn't salute. He embraced him. A slow, solemn embrace between 2 men who had only shared a battlefield once, but whose bond outlived the war. And then something unexpected happened. A line began to form, not of admirers, not of fans, but of brothers. Veterans, some in uniform, some in jeans and leather jackets, quietly stepped forward. Each placed something at the base of the stage. A patch, a coin, a set of dog tags, a letter, a silent offering, not to elevate him, but to say, we know, we remember, you matter. Some heroes don't need a headline. They just need a moment, one moment to be seen. And in that moment, Ray was no longer a ghost. He was honored, fully, finally. The base was quiet the following week. The crowds were gone. The folding chairs packed away. The brass instruments stored. The plaza returned to its everyday stillness. Gravel paths, trimmed hedges, and flags that waved gently in rhythm with the sea breeze. But something had changed, not just in the air, or among the veterans who spoke in hushed tones that Monday morning. Not just in the way the young soldiers now stood a bit straighter when passing the memorial wall. No, something permanent had shifted, and it was carved in stone. At the far right of the honor wall, a sleek, dark granite monument lined with names etched in careful precision. There was a new addition, smaller than the others, unadorned. No rank, no branch, no birth date, just a single, solemn inscription. In honor of Raven Zero, the one who never asked for recognition. Beneath it, a faint engraving of a signal wave. Morse code, simple, fitting, and perhaps more powerful than any metal. It hadn't been approved through a committee. It hadn't been debated or announced. It had simply appeared. Whispers said the general himself made the call, that he stayed late at the base that night, staring at the wall for nearly an hour before placing the order, that he personally called in the stoneworker who used to do field engraving for memorials overseas. No cameras, no press release, just quiet reverence. That morning, the young soldier, the one who had tried to stop the old man at the gate, returned to the memorial alone. His cap was in his hands, his posture still sharp, but his eyes softer than before. He stood in front of the new engraving, just staring. His lips moved as if whispering to himself, rehearsing the apology he never quite gave. Then he heard footsteps. Behind him stood Ray, same brown coat, same steady posture. But this time a faint smile curled at the edge of his weathered face. The young soldier turned, startled. "Sir, I didn't know. I was just following protocol. I'm sorry." Ray raised a hand gently. "You did your job, son. No shame in that. I used to follow rules too. But sometimes history doesn't." The young man looked down. "I'll remember this. I swear I will. For the rest of my life." Ray nodded. "Good. Then that makes two of us." They stood together in silence. 2 generations, 1 moment. No fanfare, no crowd, just a shared truth hanging in the air like mist after a storm. And as the young man turned to leave, Ray placed something in his hand. It was the call sign tag, the small silver plate worn down by time. "Keep it. You'll know when to pass it on." The soldier tried to protest, but Ray was already walking away, back toward the shipyard, or perhaps into the folds of memory once more. That day, every passerby who glanced at the wall paused. Some knelt, some saluted. Some placed their hands on the cold stone and whispered a name they never knew, but would never forget again. Some men fight for glory. Some vanish so others can return. But once in a generation, one man reminds the world that silence too can be heroic. And so finally, Raven Zero was no longer a ghost. He was written in stone, where silence could no longer erase him. In an era where recognition often travels faster than action, and validation is measured in likes, medals, and viral posts. The story of Raven Zero feels almost out of place. He never asked to be seen. He never demanded a spotlight. He simply did what needed to be done and vanished. And yet his quiet presence shook a military base to stillness. But here's the question we must ask ourselves. How many Raven Zeros are still out there today? Not necessarily in the desert, not on battlefields, but in our neighborhoods, our schools, our nursing homes, our diners, our bus stops. That man holding the door open at the VA hospital, he might have led a unit through a jungle no one came back from, except those who followed him. That quiet woman sitting alone at the memorial wall every year. She may have written classified strategy documents that saved hundreds, but were never signed with her name. That old man sweeping the sidewalk. Maybe he once took a bullet for a comrade whose grandchildren now live freely today, never knowing who made that possible. But society doesn't always see these people. We move too fast. We judge by appearance. We categorize by status, uniform or civilian, active or retired, relevant or invisible. And perhaps that's the silent tragedy of our time. We only salute when a story goes viral, but we forget to honor the stories that never get told. Ray's story is not just about the past. It's not even just about military honor. It's a mirror, held up to all of us, because every generation produces heroes who never make it into history books. The nurse who stayed late to comfort a dying stranger. The father who worked 2 jobs quietly, never missing a bill, never asking for praise. The neighbor who showed up with groceries when no one else noticed someone struggling. These are not headlines, but they are heroics. They are modern Raven Zeros, doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. The next time we see someone who looks forgotten, older, slower, less useful to the fast-moving machine of modern life, we should pause. Because the truth is, we have no idea what some people carry inside. We don't know which hand once pulled a soldier to safety under fire, which pair of boots once stood in defiance against impossible odds, which tired eyes once watched over an entire team in the dead of night. What if we treated every stranger like they might be a Raven Zero? How would that change our tone, our patience, our gratitude? Not everyone has a name on a wall, but that doesn't mean they haven't earned one. This story is a tribute, but it's also a question posed to you. How many people in your life have given more than they've received and never asked to be noticed? Have you ever told them they mattered? And more importantly, are you living like someone whose legacy won't depend on credit, but on character? Ray didn't need a crowd to validate his choices. He didn't need a medal. He just needed to know the job was done. And because of that, he became something more than a man. He became a symbol, a quiet reminder that the loudest form of courage is to keep going, even when no one's looking. Thank you for watching this story, not just with your eyes, but with your heart. Because sometimes it's not about the action sequences, the medals, or the parades. It's about a man in a brown coat, a name almost erased, a truth finally spoken. And now, we'd like to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who changed the way you saw them because of one quiet moment that revealed who they really were? Do you believe we're doing enough to honor the silent heroes around us, the ones who never ask for recognition, but quietly shape the world we live in? Let us know in the comments. Your reflections matter. Your stories matter. Because maybe you knew a Raven Zero. Maybe you are one. We encourage you to share your own experiences. A stranger whose small act of kindness stayed with you. A family member you misunderstood until one defining moment. A veteran, a teacher, a nurse, a neighbor, whose quiet bravery deserves to be told. Tell us. We read every story, and others might find hope in yours. Before you go, remember this. Don't wait until someone is gone to finally see who they were. Too often, we don't listen until it's too late. Too often, we pass by giants who've simply stopped asking to be noticed. And if this story moved you, if it made you pause and reflect, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Because this channel exists for one reason, to make sure their stories don't disappear. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.